Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 224th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast, and it's Disability History Month 2023. So on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about disabled entrepreneurship and its complexities due to the barriers society presents. And thinking about barriers, have you watched my TEDx talk about the connection between culture, race, and mental health? It's something you can watch in your break, as it's just 12 minutes long, and the link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. It is bit.ly/TEDx Wolves LO. That's WOLVSLO. I really hope you enjoy it. It was a labor of love. And if you enjoyed it, please leave a positive comment on YouTube, share and like with people you know who might be interested. And also don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Okay, so back to today's episode. Why did I decide to make an episode on this topic, not being disabled at the moment myself? And I think that's a key point, because any of us can acquire an impairment or a disability at any point in our lives. People are born with disabilities. We can acquire impairments as we get older. It tends to happen if we think about things like eyesight and hearing. And there's a specific project I've been working on around disabled entrepreneurship. And so this has been really interesting to have discussions with people who have supported disabled entrepreneurs, some of whom identify as disabled themselves, around the inherent challenges in the entrepreneurship system, or in fact, why entrepreneurship can really be a gateway to freedom and being able to have more autonomy over yourself, your work-life balance, your adjustments in your own workplace. So according to the Federation of Small Businesses, FSB, Business Without Barriers report, 25% of small business owners are disabled or have a health condition. Disabled-owned businesses contribute almost 10% of the UK's GDP. So let's just think about that, 10%, almost 10% of the UK's GDP. It's astounding and not a fact that enough of us know. Disabled-owned small businesses account for 8.6% of the turnover of all UK businesses. Now, if you weren't aware about disability or didn't have disabled people in your life in some way, what the stuff that you read in the media, the things that are out there in the media, do not reflect that brilliant stat and just how much business and entrepreneurship is in this particular community, if we can call it that. Because, of course, people may or may not identify as disabled. They may or may not want to be part of disabled communities. But if we think about that in its widest context, disabled people are more likely to go into self-employment than non-disabled people for some of the things I mentioned around autonomy, not having to navigate challenges. And if you're interested, do check out my episodes on workplace adjustments and universal design. In many of my episodes, I've talked about the lack of reasonable adjustments made at work, the battle that people have to face, particularly with micromanagers, and potentially bullying and harassment as a result of that at work. So I'm talking about the negative things. But of course, the positive thing is that disabled entrepreneurs who have chosen self-employment to fill a gap in the market, to disrupt a sector, or simply have control over their own time, and quite rightly too. So let's just wind back and think about the term entrepreneurship. So at its very core, entrepreneurship can be defined as someone who starts or owns a business. And this will range from a small business, social impact business, scale up, and large business. And then if we think about the term disability, the Equality Act 2010 defines a disability as any condition that substantially interferes with a person's ability to carry out day-to-day activities and lasts or is expected to last for more than 12 months. That is considered a disability. And normal day-to-day activities are things like mobility, doing something with your hands, physical coordination, continence, controlling your bowels and bladder, ability to lift, carry, or move everyday objects, speech, hearing, or eyesight, and memory or ability to concentrate, learn, or understand. And if we delve deeper into disability in terms of classifications, if you like, I'm not going to give classification numbers as per the Paralympics, but the general areas, I think maybe that's a better way for me to say that. A disability is any condition which impairs a person's ability to carry out day-to-day activities, as I mentioned. So this will be sensory impairments, things affecting sight or hearing, physical impairments, or illnesses that affect mobility, dexterity, or control with movement. So maybe people need a wheelchair or crutches, arthritis, multiple sclerosis, neurodivergent conditions such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, ADD, and the variety of conditions within neurodivergence. Progressive disorders such as motor neurone disease, muscular dystrophy, forms of dementia, and lupus. Illnesses with impairments, fluctuating or recurring effects such as multiple sclerosis, ME, sickle cell anemia, epilepsy, and diabetes. All mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, eating disorders, some personality disorders, sometimes self-harming behaviors, bipolar disorder. HIV and cancer from the point of diagnosis, even when there's no adverse effect on day-to-day living. Other long-term illnesses that significantly impair a person's ability to function physically or mentally, which could also be due to the effects of treatment or medication, and facial disfigurements. So that's a snapshot. Just to give you a sense, if you're not familiar with the Equality Act and the broadness of what encompasses disability. So according to a recent story in London Loves Business, and I've included the links to the FSB report and this article in the show notes, disabled entrepreneurs face severe funding inequity, resulting in 500 million in missed revenue in the UK. Okay, so we know that disabled owned businesses bring in a huge amount to the UK, and yet by not supporting disabled entrepreneurs, we as a country are missing out on 500 million pounds. So it's really infuriating, actually, that we are not, as a country, taking this seriously. So this groundbreaking research was conducted by a campaign group called Access to Funding, in partnership with several leading organisations. And they looked at the shocking disparities faced by disabled and neurodiverse entrepreneurs in the UK and the knock-on impact to the UK economy. Now, of course, we know that we should be equalizing the playing field, removing barriers, supporting people. But often what makes that happen is quantifying it in terms of money. So this is really helpful that this report does this. And I've also included a link to that Access to Funding report in the show notes as well. So these findings are really important because they've focused in on the significant barriers and missed opportunities that have meant, tragically, disabled entrepreneurs are underrepresented and underserved in the business landscape. I think as well, if I think about networking events, and I don't go to many anymore, how many are in accessible venues? Often they're really loud. So whether you have a hearing impairment or not, it's really difficult to hear. I don't know if the T-loop technology is up to scratch with people's hearing aid technology. And those are just some really basic examples. But this report found that disabled entrepreneurs in the UK are actually a staggeringly 400 times less likely to receive investment compared to their non-disabled peers. I mean, that is a shockingly stark difference, isn't it? 400 times less likely. And inaccessibility remains a major hurdle for disabled people, leading to approximately 2 billion in missed returns every month across all industries. So this enormous chasm of a funding gap has resulted in over £500 million in returns being left on the table, as I mentioned earlier, and untapped talent that could significantly contribute to economic growth and UK-wide job creation. And that's the other thing. I think in the UK, when you read anything about disability and benefits and the awful, awful press and I think very misleading comments around disability benefits and support. And I think people do absolutely deserve disability benefits. And I really am very happy with my tax money going towards that versus other things that I'm not very happy with. But, many people need accessible environments. And what better way to do this, to have a conversation with people and find out what's going to work for them. And not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, and that's totally fine. But also, if people don't feel they have a choice and they're forced into jobs that aren't fit for purpose, why aren't we enabling people to create their own environments? And we're talking about disability here, but we can apply it to many other areas, for example, parenthood, cultural barriers, and of course, no one is in a box in isolation. We're looking at the intersectionality here. So, of course, someone can be a disabled parent from a culturally diverse background. But despite the barriers, disabled and neurodiverse business owners have proven themselves to be key innovators, as they are 28% more likely to create new products and services compared to non-disabled individuals. Now, I'm actually not surprised to hear that, because if we think about the complexity of navigating life as a disabled person due to systemic and societal barriers, planning, the creativity in that cohort of people is enormous. And disabled people have a very sophisticated and intricate coping strategies because they've had to in order to overcome barriers to accessibility with creative solutions. So I really hope you're enjoying this podcast. And if you want to keep up to date, why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join the mailing list, you'll receive a free copy of my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager. And that link to join is bit.ly/MHLMEBKLNK. So how have I seen these issues affect people? So I think there is a lack of focus on investment opportunities for disabled entrepreneurs because you can't get a business loan if you're on universal credit, for example. It's seen as very risky. Benefits and credits don't count as income. The banks may not be accessible. How are there any expertise in banks that understand and really know as a job design point around disability? It might be by chance because people have disabled family members or they're caring for disabled dependents, or they've had to navigate through the benefit system themselves, or they've been disabled at one point or they still are and they now know how to manage it. But that's by chance, not by design. Managing your own needs, and that's really tricky. So access to work, which I think is a great scheme, but given the recent changes, it's very, very difficult to get your needs met in a timely fashion. So the waiting list is currently around 9 months. In this research as well, it said that 84% of people did not have equal access to the same opportunities and resources as non-disabled entrepreneurs. So this might be things like access to networking events. And it's not just the event itself, it's also if there's a travel element to getting to the event, that can be really tricky. It could be that when you start your business, you don't have the capital to be spending on accessible or transport in general. The timings, maybe there's particular times you have to have your medication and it has a particular impact, so you need to be at home, and networking events are at a particular time that means it's not accessible. So it's thinking about all of these things. And yes, it's great when things are online, and that can be really useful, but why are we pushing certain people to be online all the time when we can create a blended option for everyone? Disabled entrepreneurs only have a 0.1% of share of voice in the public sphere. I mean, that is shocking, despite disabled people being the largest minority group in the world and over 20% of the population in the UK. So, that is such another stark statistic. I think this report's so helpful because it really shines a light on how stark the differences are. And just 16.7% of disabled entrepreneurs said they are treated equally to non-disabled entrepreneurs in investment opportunities. And as I said, then you add on the elements of race, culture, ethnicity, age, caring status, and that gap is likely to get wider. So what else? So what can we do? You might be wondering, well, what's this got to do with workplaces? And what's this got to do with me? I don't run an entrepreneurship business. But there are things that we can do. And I think it's really knowing the answers and actually sort of lobbying and thinking about, well, what can we do as a next step? Because only 45% of small business employers are aware of access to work, and only 5% have used it. Now, I think the scheme is really helpful. It's not perfect, but if we can raise awareness about it, and maybe there are people in your workplace who are thinking about setting up a business, you can start talking about this. 23% have heard of Disability Confident. Now, the Disabilities Confidence Scheme is a government scheme to show how committed to disabled opportunities in the workplace an employer is. So there are 3 levels. Almost like they're not called bronze, silver, and gold, but it is like bronze, silver, and gold. But can you familiarize yourself with that and think about how can I then apply this to other areas that I'm in? So maybe you're a trustee in an organization. You might want to raise some of those points on your trustee board. Potentially, you might want to offer some feedback to your local enterprise network or your councillors or your MPs around actually what are we doing around supporting disabled entrepreneurship? Whether you're disabled or not, I don't think it matters, because if we're missing out on so much money, that's what people are going to hear in terms of input and outcomes and turnovers. 34% of those who know about the Disability Confidence Scheme understand it, and 28% think it's important. So we can build on the frameworks that are already there to make things better and more sustainable. And if we think about disability in the workplace, and I think more and more people are having blended careers. So they used to be called portfolio careers. It used to be thought about that was a very much of a freelancer outlook, but lots of people have portfolio careers in that they work somewhere for 2 days a week, or indeed have a side hustle and want to make that side hustle something permanent. So, having conversations about that, encouraging people to think about how they want to start their business, getting out there and understanding what the barriers are, because actually if we don't, we need to use the systems of democracy that we have and communication that we have. And the way in which this particular government go on about disabled people in employment, well, you can't just push people into employment if they're not meaningful, if it's not meaningful work that doesn't suit them. And actually, why aren't we thinking about entrepreneurship in a really positive, productive way that's also suitable for the needs of the individual? But if you're interested in knowing more about workplaces, specifically workplace and disability, check out podcast episode 120, which is having conversations about workplace adjustments, how to do this. Episode 119, universal design and why it's so important. So in that episode, I talk about what is universal design, what it means, and how we can implement it for disability equality. But actually, when you implement universal design, you benefit everyone. And podcast episode 170, what is disability and intersectionality? So what is it? What does it look like? And why we need to care about it in the workplace. So I've really enjoyed doing this piece of work around disability entrepreneurship, and it's definitely taught me a lot. And we can all create space, access, and a positive environment for disabled entrepreneurs by firstly being aware of the barriers. We've got the stats now with these brilliant reports, and the link is in the show notes. Understanding the environmental barriers, our attitudinal barriers, organizational barriers, and moving to remove those as much as we can and raising the issue. Understanding a little bit more about access to work and how it could help people inside the workplace, and if they're setting up their own business, how it might be helpful and the timelines around that. If you sit on a charity board or charities that could support people, shout about it. Think about charity funding or entrepreneurial funding. It doesn't have to be from a charity basis for startups. Perhaps some wealthy individuals, or you are one. This could be a really great way to practically make a difference and make a change in a very mutually beneficial way. But the other point is, it's not just about startups, it's about scaling and going beyond startups. So how do we help businesses to flourish and scale, particularly when they're innovative business ideas, which they are coming from disabled entrepreneurs? Write to your MP as well about social care funding. So one of the biggest barriers as well is social care packages for individuals, and of course disabled people care for other people often as well. And don't forget, we can all acquire impairments and become disabled and carers for disabled people. So this is for the good of the whole society. And if you work in an education role, what's the scope you have for talking about entrepreneurship, what it means, the different types of entrepreneurship? We're not talking about celebrity entrepreneurs necessarily, but actually running a market stall and selling a food product, doing crafting and selling that. That is all part of the entrepreneurship journey. So be ready and open to have the conversation. Don't ask for reams of medical history from people. We don't need to do that, but we might be interested in someone's business and to talk about that. Don't overcomplicate it. Use the democratic frameworks that are there, and encourage people to start businesses and talk to them about their ideas. And if you're a disabled individual listening to this, go for it. Start small, and don't forget the resources available. They might not always be specific, but there is the Prince's Trust for 18 to 30-year-olds. There'll be a local economic partnership, your local chamber of commerce, and also specific business mentors. So I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget the resources, the FSB report, the London Loves Business, the access to funding report, and the podcast episodes. And if you want to work with me, please do check out my website, diverseminds.co.uk, for more information. And finally, if you enjoyed the show, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast from. Until next time, everyone, take care, and I'll catch you on another episode soon.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.